Great, thank you. Yeah, so welcome to part one of Adults in the Know series. Today we're going to be talking about media literacy, what it is, why it's important, kind of the basics. And then the next two in the series are going to dive into a little bit more detail. We're going to talk about actual fact checking and how to do it. And then we're going to talk about some social media responsibilities in the third one. So if you can make it to the next two, you'll get even more information. But this is a good overview of some important information that we can go over. Okay, so a quick introduction to me. I'm a school librarian, information literacy nerd. I really love this topic. It's something that I have slowly begun to understand over time, and I'm still learning. So I'll answer, I think it was Emily's question about questions. I love questions from the audience. So I learn as you guys are learning. So if you have a question, something you're interested in while we're talking, go ahead, you can unmute yourselves and jump right in. Okay, so we have an hour today, and this is a huge topic. So I'm gonna go over the beginning part fairly quickly. Okay, so this is my little joke about interruptions. It's facetious. I actually do like being interrupted, as I said before. Throw out a question, even if you disagree with what I'm saying. That makes the conversation even more in-depth and more interesting. So go ahead, type it if you'd like in the chat. If you feel comfortable unmuting yourself and jumping in, go ahead and do that too. Okay, so this is sort of a disclaimer about this presentation. Just like with a lot of things in life, it's not just black and white, it's very nuanced. So I'm trying to take this very, very complicated topic and condense it into 3 one-hour talks. And you will be learning a lot, but there's a lot of details to it that you won't quite understand unless you come at it with an open mind. So I just sort of want to start it by saying that a lot of what I'm saying is not quick fixes. And that brings me to the next point, is that we have to sort of have a paradigm shift in the way we think about getting media and listening to media, reading media. Because we need to sort of take our cerebral functioning and just sort of turn it up a notch. We're so used to scrolling through news, scrolling through social media, and just, looking at it for 1 second, 3 seconds. We're not really digesting it. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today and the next 3 presentations is really turning on our brains and really thinking about things a little bit more in depth. Okay, so the inspiration for this presentation came from 2 organizations. The News Literacy Project and First Draft. These are fairly new nonprofit organizations that are helping people understand news in media. Checkology is a product created by the News Literacy Project. It was originally made for K-12 students. Teachers could use it for free. They could pay for a little bit bigger version of it, but starting in, I believe it was September, it became free for everybody, even people not connected with a school. So it's something that is a powerful tool that they're growing, and they just came out with a conspiracy theory module, which is quite interesting. So if you are interested in the things I'm talking about today and want to go more in depth, you check out these 2 organizations and Checkology. A lot of what I talk about today is taken directly from the News Literacy Project in the way that they think about dealing with media. Okay, so we're going to learn a couple things today. We're going to sort of understand the landscape of media today. Now, when I talk about media, I'm not just talking about news. I'm talking about just everything we see with our eyes and everything we hear with our ears, primarily online. You can also take these lessons and apply them to printed material too, but the focus of these presentation is more online. we're going to talk about developing a scale of trust. So when you see something online, deciding whether to trust it or not sort of exists on a scale, and how much effort you're going to put into researching it and see how much truth is behind it. And then we're kind of going to understand that we can't fact check the whole internet. So we're going to talk a little bit about picking our hill to die on. What's really important to us? And that's personal to you. What is important for you to know is, 100% true, really trustworthy. So this is a very personal piece right here, what your scale of trust is and what your hill to die on is. It's going to be different for everybody. And then we're going to use CRAP to evaluate the resource's trustworthiness. It's an acronym, and we're going to go over exactly what that means. But it basically is a very simple 4-step way of checking something's trustworthiness. And the final piece we're going to talk about is we're just going to talk a little bit about bias. It's a very complex topic that you probably could teach a whole college course on, but we're just going to scratch the surface of it and maybe get a little bit more in-depth thinking about what bias is and where it exists. Okay, so interacting with media today, we're going to learn a little bit about what we need to know. We need to know what the motivations are of people who share incorrect information. We also need to know that emotion drives action. We need to sort of understand what is out there, what kind of media is out there. And then we need to know that there's some real life consequences. We're going to talk about each of these 4 things in depth and go over examples of each right now. So, understanding motivations. So there are basically 4 different types of motivations. And this is something I took directly from the News Literacy Project. This is their model of these motivations. And we're going to give examples of each 4. So go ahead and starting with self-interest. So the main motivation for misinformation that's out there, someone putting out information that's wrong, untrue, their goal is to make money, usually, legally or illegally. And it's usually scammers, companies, people who want to get more money. So an example of that is this email. So it's an email, it says payment declined. Hey, we attempted to authorize your credit card. It didn't go through. You got to send us your credit card number with the code on the back immediately so you can pay us. This is a scammer who's created this to try to get your credit card information. Now you look at this quickly, using a very quick glance, and you're like, oh gosh, I don't want my Netflix to stop. Let me just type it in and send it really quick. So this is an example of someone using the self-interest motivation. So the next is group interest. And this is to have a group that basically wants an advantage over other groups. And usually it's governments, partisans, candidates, it's usually a group organization like that. It can also be, a non-government organization too. We've seen a lot of that lately in the news. People sending out a lot of information to gain advantage for their particular organization. And an example of that is this post. This is an actual post from Facebook. It's a little blurry there, but it says, here we have staffers stuffing ballots in Flint, Michigan. And if you play the video, it has a picture of this gentleman in the black and another lady just putting lots of ballots inside this box over and over and over again. And if you were to see this, you were to think, oh gosh, complete fraud. But if you were to do a little research, do a little fact checking, you would know that this is actually a video from Russia in 2018. So not only is it not the United States, it's from 2 years ago. So it cannot be part of this current election. And if you're interested, and I can send a PDF version of this presentation to everybody afterwards, is there's the actual video is here at the Washington Post from 2018, and it shows the date, it being old, and the place of where it happened. So that's an example of group interest misinformation. The next one is altruistic. And so this is the type of misinformation that people share to be helpful. They're just regular people, just like you and me, who see something online and think, oh my gosh, other people need to know this. And they might not necessarily know what they're sharing is untrue. An example of that is back when the pandemic started, people were saying a great way to save your mask is to microwave it for a couple minutes. And that will kill anything that's on it, and then you can reuse it. Of course, that starts fires. And a lot of fire stations around the country had to put out statements saying, please don't do this. So some people who share misinformation aren't doing it because they're trying to be mean or spread in misinformation. They're just doing it because they think they're helping, and they just haven't done their homework. And then the last one is actually malicious, the complete opposite of that. There are people out there who literally just want to make people mad, and they literally just want to create distrust. That's their only goal. They don't care about getting advantage. They don't care about money. They just like the chaos. And these people are called trolls, usually. They're also extremists, too. And an example of that is this post from when the Black Panther movie first came out. These posts were going on Twitter. It says, was at the Black Panther premiere, but a group of Black youths said this movie wasn't for me. I'm white. They then proceeded to assault me. I'm heading to the ER now. And you've got a picture of a photo of a sink filled with blood. One would imagine, the person who was attacked is, blotting the blood off of their face. So that creates lots of anger, seeing something like that. But if you were to do some fact checking, you would know that this photo is from Flickr. I don't have the exact date, but it's like from, I think it's 2009 it was from, which obviously was well before the Black Panther movie came out. So people might have been unkind to people at the premiere, but this is not true. This particular instance is not true right here. Someone took a picture and was misleading people on what happened. So that's the final example. And we're going to go over in the next presentation about how to find this and how to know where to look for this information. And that's kind of the fun part, is actually digging into the internet and finding those answers. Okay, so I'll stop there for a second. Does anyone have any questions before I move on? Okay, cool. Like I said, I'm going through this first part kind of quickly because the real meat of the presentation is going through the CRAP part. So we'll keep moving until we get to that. So the first thing is understanding our emotions. Our emotions play a key part in how we react and share misinformation. So we have two different parts of our brain. We have the prefrontal cortex, which really thinks hard about everything. And then we have the amygdala, which is automatic reactions, reflexes, get away from something that's dangerous. And so when we are emotional, we're more using that amygdala part of our brain and just reacting immediately and not thinking. So we really want to try to focus on that rational thought and take a breath. When we see that post about someone being bloodied at a premiere of a Black Panther movie, we might immediately get very angry and very emotional about that. And before we do anything, before we complain somewhere, before we share that information, we need to be like, let's check this out. Because people who share misinformation, this is what they're preying on. they're taking advantage of your emotions. They know that if they make you emotional, you're not going to think clearly. They know that you're not going to use that smart part of your brain. So emotions are good. You want to be emotional about certain things, but don't let them be used against you. Realize that that is the weapon of some people who are putting misinformation out there, is they're using your emotions against you. Okay. So the next piece is looking at the landscape of media. So we want to sort of see how can misinformation be shared out there? How can it be created? And sort of see the tools of media out there. So the first is generators. So this is a post by NASA. Their logo is very tiny, but you can see it there. And it says, NASA, looking for a new hobby while in lockdown? Get one of NASA's own blue light lasers to draw on the moon. And you can see there's a tiny little heart on the moon right there. And this is a Twitter post. And it has that little blue circle, which usually means that it's like a verified account, like, oh yes, this is actually NASA, it's not a fake account. But what it really is a post that I made in about 30 seconds using a Twitter feed generator. So there are websites out there. This one's Zube, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. But basically what you can do is you can take any photos. I just stole the NASA logo from their website. That's a picture that I took of the moon, and you just upload it, type what you want it to say, type the date you want it to have been posted, and put how many people have liked it and any other information. And all of a sudden you get a post that looks real, that looks legitimate. These are so easy. You don't have to download anything. You don't have to go to a website and sign in. You literally I did this, I think, in probably about 60 seconds, I made it. So when you see all those screenshots of posts of famous people, of politicians, of even people you know, understand that it might not be real. It might be from a generator because it's so easy to make. And like I said, in the next presentation, I'll tell you how to actually identify these. Okay, so the next one is bots. So another tool of misinformation is bots. A bot is basically a computer program that either creates fake accounts, creates fake posts, but basically just floods a platform with a type of profile or a type of post. An example is, again, I don't have the date of this one, but I think it was within the last 5 years. Facebook found 3 billion fake accounts that were created by bots. 3 billion. That's a lot. So what happens is people take these bots and they write a computer program for them to join these groups, and then they'll just start posting things about a certain perspective. So maybe the goal, the motivation of this misinformer was to make money. So they make 100,000 accounts on Facebook, and they start pumping out these posts about how they love this new water bottle, and they're trying, because that's their company, they're trying to sell this water bottle. And so all of a sudden 100,000 people on the internet are saying this is the best water bottle ever. And so people start looking at it and saying, oh, well, hey, I need that water bottle too. But it wasn't actual people who were saying it was amazing. It was a computer program created by a company to sell you the idea that this is the best water bottle ever. I know it's a lot. You might feel like you're going to walk away this morning and be like, I can't trust anything. And I understand that feeling, but there is a lot of ways that we can deal with that. And like I said, we'll get into that CRAP method quickly before we end this afternoon or this morning. So the next one is content farms. These are weird. These are very strange. The best example of these is a 5-minute crafts. You'll find these on YouTube, on Instagram, and they're quick, less than a minute videos of how to do something. Sometimes they're actually kind of interesting, and they are little life hacks, little interesting tips. But some of them out there are so strange. Like this particular one is a video, and there's no context. Usually there's no talking. It's just a person doing something. It shows this lady putting hot glue on a toothbrush, immediately putting it in her mouth, not letting it cool or anything. And there's no context of what this is for, but it is specifically geared towards teenagers. So you think about a teenager who might, they don't have a fully developed brain quite yet. They might be like, oh, let's see what this does. And they've got a burned mouth. Some of them are about bleaching strawberries, so you can eat white strawberries, but then of course you have a strawberry filled with bleach. Yeah. Their goal is to just make all this content that gets viewed over and over and over again, and they get ad revenue. So that's how they're making money. Their motivation is self-interest, to get more money. Okay, and I mentioned trolls earlier. And it's worth mentioning again, because especially now, well, it's been for forever, you're online, you read something that someone says and you're mad immediately and you start responding. Some of those people might just be there to make you mad. They're not there to have an honest conversation. And this is exactly what they're doing. They're there sitting behind their computer, just enjoying the show. They enjoy watching the people just get mad and in a fight. So they're eating their popcorn, enjoying the show of you arguing with other people. So the term "don't feed the trolls" is quite popular for people who understand that, no, you're not a person having a debate. You're a person who's just trying to get people mad. Okay, so this next one is, I think, the scariest of them all. So the term is deep fakes, and basically it's computer software that can allow you to take the face of one person and put it on someone else. The technology in the last 2 years has exploded, and it's amazing. In some cases, you really can't tell the difference between a real person and a fake person. So this is an example, a sort of funny example, and I'll play it really quick. But there are other examples out there of politicians saying things. So if you were to see a video of a particular politician saying something, you would believe that is truth, but it is literally just computer generated. Someone has made it. So I'll show you this example of Ryan Reynolds as Willy Wonka. I don't think I optimized my screen to share sound, so let me just reshare.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just do this again. Okay, good. So now you can actually hear it.
There is no life I know to compare with your imagination. Living there, you'll be free if you truly wish to be.
So what's really interesting about that, and again, I'm just going to reshare so now I can see you guys again, is that there's another technology that lays on top of this where people can reproduce a voice too. So not only do you have the face of someone saying something that they never said, but you can actually, using artificial intelligence, create their actual voice. Now, what I find really scary about this, you know, yes, you can do it. Sometimes it takes a computer, you know, a couple hours to produce this, and, you know, it takes a lot of effort and time, but the technology is getting so good that it can be done live. So if I had this technology and I could interface Ryan Reynolds' face on my face right now, reproduce his voice right now, and it would look like I am Ryan Reynolds giving this presentation live. So it's not quite there yet. Like, you know, it looks a little glitchy on the edge of faces, and the voices sound a little robotic, but compared to where we were 2 years ago, it is amazing, the accuracy of what these computers can do. So this, a lot of scientists, researchers are working on finding ways of quickly identifying saying this right now, or is this a deep fake that we can't trust? So this is something that, unfortunately, in future presentations, I don't have how to fact check these, but just knowing that it's out there is important. Just having that knowledge that it could be something that you're seeing. Okay. Oops. Okay, so the next thing is sort of knowledge I want you to have about the landscape of media and misinformation is opinion creep. When I was in undergrad, I remember, and I think it was about 2002. I remember CNN started making t-shirts of the headlines of their news articles. And so for any headline of any news that came out, you could buy a t-shirt that said that. And I immediately just, and at that point, I wasn't an information literate nerd. I was just a regular person, but I knew that that wasn't right. I knew that sensationalizing the headlines enough to sell clothing, there was something wrong with that. And so what we have, you know, evolving from then to now is we just have more and more people sensationalizing news and, you know, inserting their opinion into headlines and articles. And so we're seeing some opinion creep into journalism. Now, that's not true with all places, but it is happening. And we're going to talk a little bit later about bias and things like that, and how, and trustworthiness of actual news organizations. But knowing that there is this trend towards opinion creeping into news is important. So some things you want to look for is obviously a reputable news organization would label their opinion pieces as editorial, opinion, commentary, and you would know, you know, whether this is an opinion or whether this is actual news piece. So the next thing is you want to look for is just see that there's exaggeration, there's sarcasm, irony, and I have an example right here. This was from a few years ago. This was from 2018. And I saw this headline, which wasn't too bad. You know, it said it was a disastrous White House briefing. But then as I read through the article, I saw this little thing right here. An exaggerated what? That's not intelligent journalism, in my opinion. So that we have so much competition in the news world that sometimes people are maybe going a little step out of bounds. Now, if you're really interested in analyzing journalism, the News Literacy Project and First Draft are a place to really look. I'll be honest, I haven't gone into those modules quite so much. I'm more interested in the misinformation side than how to do good journalism, but there are some really interesting modules where you get to pretend to be a journalist and you're faced with the questions and the situations that they have to deal with. So it's a really good way of getting some practice on what it means to be a journalism, and then you can understand their perspective and what they're doing. Okay, so here's the bias chart. So you'll probably have seen this chart before. If not, you probably see it at some point. And when I first saw this chart, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I am going to use this in all my classes. and I'm going to, teach it to all my kids. But then I found an article that made me change my mind. I still think it's important. I still think it's a good conversation piece. But what they said, and actually it was a man from the News Literacy Project who said this, is he said, it oversimplifies a very complicated issue. And it does. Sometimes that's what our brains need. We're bombarded with media everywhere, and sometimes we just need a break. And so this chart, and I'll show it in a second, helps give our brains a shortcut into figuring out what bias might exist where. So use this chart, but understand that it's a simplified version of the world. And what we need to do is really need to look at the individual news articles that we're reading and analyze those, and not just label a particular news outlet as biased left or biased right. We need to analyze each individual journalist. We need to analyze each individual article for what they are. Just like we don't want to be biased, against different races and people, we don't want to be biased against different news outlets, because not every journalist who works for a particular news organization is going to insert bias into their articles. So let me show it to you. So this is the chart. It was made by a lawyer originally. It became so popular that she actually created a nonprofit organization to keep it updated, which is quite interesting. And I'll give a little tour of the chart in just a second. So basically you have at the top of the chart news organizations that have been analyzed by this nonprofit as being more fact-finding, fact reporting, limited or no opinion in these news outlets. You have Reuters, Bloomberg, NPR, The Hill, AP. So these places you could rely on to be more fact-based. As we move down, you have analysis. Opinion has its place in reporting, but you need to know that it's opinion. So these are more sort of analysis, some fair persuasion. And as you move down, you get things that are more selective, and they might have a little bit of an unfair persuasion. And then finally at the bottom, things that are labeled actual propaganda and things that are actually inaccurate and false.
Miranda,
oh yeah, go ahead.
Do you mind? I'm going to share a link in the chat because I know you have the image here, but the website for the media bias chart has an interactive component too, if anyone's interested.
Yeah, it does. It's since the woman who made it, and I've forgotten what her name is. Since she made this nonprofit, it has become quite an interesting project. They have an interactive chart, and it goes way in depth with her analysis. And what I like about her is she has it posted on her organization's website how she made these choices. What research she did to make these choices, which is important to know, because like I said at the beginning of the presentation, this isn't all black and white. And as you'll see, she changes the chart every once in a while, and you can see the evolution of some of these organizations. They have moved positions over the years. And then you can see left to right is like if it's more liberal leaning or conservative leaning. As you get into more, people trying to push you towards the conservative side or the liberal side, you can see the chart sort of as the upside down V shape.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
So I did share that in the chat. There's two links, the home website and then the link directly to the interactive piece of it.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you find yourself with time, it is great to sort of read the history of how she made this and what it means. And I think it is a good tool, especially if you see a news outlet that you're not familiar with and you're like, well, where is this? And you see like, let's see, Occupy Democrats. I had never heard of that outlet. Where does it fall? And you can quickly see and like, oh, okay, I might have to look at this a little deeper because it might not be trustworthy. Same thing if you went over here to the Daily Caller. If it's further down, you might be like, let me use my brain a little more and let me check these facts that they're reporting in this news piece. So it's a very powerful tool for a quick look, but make sure that we're not pigeonholing these organizations into where they are on this chart, because a journalist might be quite trustworthy that is, further down the chart. Okay, so these are just a couple pieces of bias. There's different bias types, just like we talked about. There are different motivations for misinformation. There are different motivations for bias. You have partisan, someone who wants a certain political group to win. Corporate, you want your company to make money. And these are all, and the other one too is here, a big story. So you might change a little bit of bias in your story to make it a bigger story, to make it the best story, because that's what gets the news organization money. And you can also create bias different ways. You can frame facts in a certain light. You can use a tone like that in that CNN article that I had before, where it was like, what? That's a tone that you're presenting to your readers. You can use certain sources. You can only use sources that support your claim. You can only select stories that tell what you want to say, and you can ignore other stories. And then, of course, you can just, not be fair and balanced about certain topics. And I have here throughout the presentation at the bottom, I have the webinars where I pulled some of this information from, so they go more in depth about these different things if you wanted to continue your education on bias. Okay, so I'm going to keep going because I want to make sure you have time for everything. So quickly, real life consequences to misinformation. We saw on Wednesday some real life consequences to misinformation of what happened at the Capitol. I didn't put that in the presentation, but that's certainly noteworthy. Some other things that have happened in the past, that in Mexico, there were actually 2 men who were murdered because someone made a rumor that they had abducted some children using WhatsApp. And so that's a real life consequence. Someone actually died. And then the other one is the Pizzagate scandal, where there was a shooting in a Washington, D.C. pizza shop because someone believed that there was a children trafficking ring going on there, which was misinformation, untrue, but it had real life consequences. So, and I usually use this piece for my middle schoolers because they're like, oh, whatever, if it's not real, it's not a big deal. But just knowing and remembering that there are real life consequences to this misinformation is an important thing to keep in the back of your mind. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the scale of trustworthiness. So I'm going to start going into the CRAP analysis and understand that the more effort you put into fact checking, the more you're going to know whether it's trustworthy or not. So it's kind of this relationship of the more effort you put in, the more you'll know whether it's trustworthy or not trustworthy. So I'm going to dive right into it so we don't run out of time. Okay, so the first is to check the currency of a piece of information. And that means checking when it was published, because that's important. Because if you were to read an article about our favorite non-planet Pluto from a couple of years ago, it would say that it is a planet. If you were to look at an article about Pluto from a little bit earlier, it would be not a planet. But if you were to look at an article today, it would be a dwarf planet. So depending on what article you're reading and when it was published, you're going to get different information. So knowing when something is published is very important. Just like with that Russian ballot stuffing, you tried to pass that off as something that happened now, but it actually happened before. So we can check currency a couple different ways. We can check the copyright date. We can check in our search results, sometimes it will say a date right there. So you can skim your results and see that there's a publication or an update date. And then also having working links, because sometimes you'll find a website and if you click on a link and it doesn't go anywhere, that might be a clue that it's old because they haven't updated it in a while. So the next piece of the acronym is reliability. And reliability is, they're all important, but this is sort of one that is, if you only were to do one of these on a check of information, it would be probably the most important. So it's important to know that you can rely on the information. So here is a picture of an actor saying, save time, avoid the line, vote from home. And then it has a little way saying, if you text this hashtag to a certain place, that will count as your vote, your official presidential vote. Of course, it's not true. You might be able to text your Dancing with the Stars vote, but you cannot text your presidential vote. And so knowing who has the reliable information is really important. Are you going to trust an actor? Are they reliable when it comes to talking about voting, or is your government reliable when you're talking about voting? So it's really important to know what source to go to when it comes to reliability. I'll skip that one. Okay, so the ways we can check that is, if it's an article online, you can see at the bottom, do they have a list of sources they used? Because that way you can check their sources and to see if their facts are right. Are there no errors? You know, something's not reliable if there's a lot of spelling mistakes. Are there citations inside? So I think I have some pictures of those. So in-text citations, if you go to any Wikipedia article, you'll see tiny little numbers after a fact to see that they actually cited something, that they actually have information on where they got their information. And then for online resources, it's important to find places that have limited advertisements. Now, it's not to say that sites with ads are not trustworthy, but the more ads they have, it might make you think, why do they have this information out here? They have ads, they're making money. A lot of the times, you know, you might be getting information from someone who just doesn't have the money to buy a website, so they use an ad-supported one. So it doesn't mean necessarily that it's untrustworthy, but open your mind to thinking, let's double check this somewhere else if it's heavy with ads. And the next is authority. This is another, I'd say this is the second one that's most important, to check the authority of the information. So authority is important because you want the right people telling you the right information. You know, you want your doctor to be an authority on the disease that you have. And there are certain ways we can check that. We can find who the author is, and we can analyze their credentials, and we can analyze their certifications. We can also find the organization that is supporting them and do the same thing for them. So sometimes when a piece is published online, you'll have an author, the person who actually wrote it, but then you'll have the person who, or the organization who is supporting them. Is it a university? Is it a nonprofit? Is it a government? You know, it's someone who's supporting this being published. And so you can check authority by looking at the About Us part of a website, looking at the Contact Us, see who they are. And then once you find out who that person is, usually on a reliable news article at least, it will say right at the top who wrote this. And then you just Google them. You know, what credentials do they have? What certifications do they have? If they're talking about a medical disease, if they're talking about migraines, you want to see that they have some education related to migraines. Maybe they have some particular award or research that is related to that. And they're not just guessing off the top of their head, like, hey, you know, if you eat chocolate, you'll get rid of your migraines. So the next piece is looking at the organization. Again, you can look at the About Us page. You can look at who the domain owner is. You can also look at the top level domain, and that's just a fancy way of saying, is it .org, .gov, .biz? You know, knowing what the actual website is can give you a clue. Because if you go somewhere and it's .gov, it might be pretty trustworthy. If it's .org, might be trustworthy, but you want to look into what that organization is. So a way that you can check, I used to work for a company that made software for nonprofits and associations, and there is an organization that certifies nonprofits and associations, and it's ASAE. So if you can see that they have staff that work for them that are certified, you can know that it's a legitimate nonprofit, a legitimate organization or association. They're not just a group of people who just decided that they want to have their own organization without any trustworthiness. Okay, so I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go. So the last one is purpose. And so I'm going to go into purpose a little bit more in the next presentation because it's such a big topic, but understanding the purpose of information can be important. And this does go back and relate to the motivations of misinformation, but it goes a little bit more in depth. So, and purpose can be important. Can anyone guess what this example is? It's War of the Worlds.
Okay.
And so if you know the original story of War of the Worlds, it was a radio show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was presented with very little introduction to the listeners. But for those who tuned in after the introduction, it was presented as a news report, as aliens landing, I believe, in Pennsylvania and attacking. And this was presented at a time when there was no internet, there were no TVs, there was only radio. And so people listening freaked out and thought that it was real.
Right.
If they had understood the purpose of it was to entertain, they would have been able to look at this presentation in the particular light that it was meant to be seen in, and it is not as actual news. So purpose can be very important, understanding why someone has put information out there. And so these are the 6 purposes that exist. According to Checkology, this is a great module that I use every year with my students. They dive deep into these 6 different purposes and tell us about how to analyze each of these purposes. But it is to inform, which would be like the news. I'm here to inform you of something. To sell, is to sell you something. Entertain, persuade, to provoke, and to document. To document is really just raw data. We think of cell phone videos. You know, if someone's videotaping an arrest happening, the purpose of that information is just to document what happened. There's no analysis, there's no anything to it. And so you can go into each of these a little bit more in depth when we talk a little bit next week. But I wanted to make sure that we had enough time to talk about those. And then I left some time for questions because we have about 7 minutes left. So does anyone have questions? I know it was a lot in 1 hour.
If we do go over a little bit, it's not a problem at all. So don't
Okay, cool.
feel like, yeah, we can get through everyone's questions. Yeah, does anybody have anything? Nothing has come in the chat so far. I
Good.
think everyone's internalizing maybe.
I know. I try to slow down sometimes, not talk so fast, but it is a lot. I'll give you guys a second to think and see if I have a question. And if not, I do have some examples we could look at.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I see some volumes coming on. So if you have something, please ask.
All I can say is that now that I hear all this, that I can take a second look at things before I say, oh, that's true, or it's not true. I'm going to be more skeptical of what I see and hear, and and make sure I really think that's true and understanding. That's what I got out of all of this.
Right.
Yeah, and good. I'm glad that that was your one takeaway, because I think that's I think the most important one. So thanks.
Yeah, great.
Oh, I see a hand raised. Yes.
Miranda, this has really been quite a nice, quick summary. And I'm thinking of how important it is as we get into the next year,
Mhm.
which according to the news this morning, it could be tumultuous. How very, very important this is. And I'm wondering if the library has any plan to put this on YouTube, to do some promotion of the analysis that you've spent so much time and energy thinking about. I'd really like to be able to take the recording and share it with some groups of people that I work with. So
Yes.
I'm wondering if there's any plan there.
Yes, Patricia, thank you for that question. Let me turn my video back on here. We are recording the presentation right now. So after we conclude today, I'll be able to save that recording and I'll have it embedded on our website and also shared on our Facebook page. I'd be happy to email the link directly to the attendee list today too, if you want to share that or forward it to anybody.
And it would be okay to share it.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, I think that, yeah, definitely get the word out there.
Please.
Yeah. Oh, and like I said, this is the introduction part. Next week is where I'll actually show you how to do a lot of this fact checking that I showed. So that's going to be the part that I don't know who said the comment before, but like now you know to stop and think. The next one is going to be, what do you do next after you stop and think?
Go ahead, Dan.
Hello. Oh, go ahead.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, you got to really watch out for groups like white supremacists, Ku Klux Klan. They still exist.
Mm-hmm.
You, no matter how you put it, you really have to watch what they're saying, because they're radical.
Yeah, and that goes back to
History. If you look at history of medieval Europe or Vikings, guess what? They did the same thing.
Yeah, well, that goes back to that motivation of the misinformation. Is they're group centered. They're trying to promote their group. They're trying to improve their group. They're trying to, get benefits for their group. And so that's exactly one of those motivations of misinformation, is they choose to use misinformation to promote their group and stir trouble rather than legitimate ways.
One last thing I like to say. I've been watching a video about beginnings of the Middle Ages and all the debate going on about religion. It's very informative about where all these viewpoints were coming from. And the mixture of, like, some of them mixing Christianity and Persian and whatnot. You should read some of that. It's complex and very interesting.
Yeah, well, you bring up a great point, and that's exactly what we all need to do is to do that research so we can see those deep, complex things. like I had those zebras at the beginning. It's so complicated. It's not black and white. So educating yourself, you know, in religions, in groups, in organizations is only going to help you navigate
Well,
media better.
it's other things like one of the things that one of the DVDs talked about was that when the Vikings invade England, they find Roman infrastructure. They go to Ireland and none of it's there. It radically changes their viewpoint of what to do because they don't find the same things everywhere they went.
Yeah, well, and that's changing your viewpoint. That's exactly what we want people to do. So yeah. I was curious. We do have like a minute left, and I do have one simple example. You know, if you want to sort of trickily get someone to have a paradigm shift, you can tell them about dihydrogen monoxide. I don't know if any of you have heard this before, but if you are looking to quickly get someone into a paradigm shift, I'll show you this great website to help them get maybe that little click in their brain to realize that thinking a little more in depth is going to help. So it's this website. It's called Facts About Dihydrogen Monoxide. And I actually had, well, I'll give that example later, but so it's a website. It's telling facts about dihydrogen monoxide. And so if we scroll down, here's a question here. It's like a frequently asked question. Should I be concerned about dihydrogen monoxide? Yes, you should. And let's see, I'll give some examples. So some of the, I was trying to find the quick answers here. Okay, I can't read them in the text, but I can tell them to you. So dihydrogen monoxide causes deaths, hundreds of deaths a year. It is corrosive. It can cause death if you breathe it in. It can cause death if you ingest too much of it. And it's so corrosive that it can eat through iron and things like that. And did you know that it is found in a lot of places? It's found in apple juices. It's found in applesauce. It's actually sprayed on farms and sprayed on all sorts of crops. It even has been found in water fountains in schools. But the government doesn't regulate this chemical at all. They don't do anything. There's no warnings about it anywhere. And so as I tell you these things, and you read these things on this website, you might think, well, the government should do something about this. I don't want this chemical sprayed on my crops, on my food. I don't want this in my kids' apple juice. And you might feel a little upset by it. But you can trickily tell these people you're sharing this information with that dihydrogen monoxide is simply the scientific way of saying water. So if you present this in the right way to someone, they might get all riled up about dihydrogen monoxide and then only realize that it was water. I had a cousin who fell for this and posted this online, very angry about dihydrogen monoxide, only to tell them that no, it's really just water. All those things I said were true. I was just misleading you into thinking that it was something bad. It is corrosive. It does rust iron. You can die if you breathe it in. You can die if you drink too much, but it's water and you don't need to have that taken away. So I like using this example for my middle school students and getting them to open their minds a little bit and not just believe what you say and not give into that emotion or fear that is created by seeing something online. So this is a website. I can put together a list of links and I can send that out. That can be forwarded to you guys if you wanted to use that as an example. But it's a librarian's favorite example to give to students. Try to trick them into having a little bit more of an open mind.
That's a great example, Miranda. Thank you. And you know, at first glance, and this is one I haven't heard before, but at first glance, you know, it looks complicated, but then if you break it down, the di to hydrogen, H2O, H2O.
Yep.
I mean, it's like, okay, I get it now. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions before I sort of wrap us up a little bit? Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's wonderful. Thank you, Miranda, for presenting today. I think it was very informative, and I even I learned about specifically the generators for those Twitter feeds that I was not aware of at all. So that's wild to me.
Yeah.
I am
When you
going
see how many screenshots there are.
Yeah.
of-
So Miranda will be presenting again in 2 weeks from today, which is the 23rd. So if you're not signed up for that event already, I'm sending the link in chat. So that's our direct calendar link for our next session. And I also want to let everyone know that we do have a feedback form. And if you don't want to click these in the chat right now, it's no problem. I will follow up with an email. But we do have an event feedback form if you'd like to fill that out and give feedback for the presentation today. And I want to thank everyone for being here. I would love to thank Miranda for being here and for everyone's attentiveness and presence today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. And if you do take that feedback thing, give positive and negative feedback. I always love to learn from my presentation, so you won't hurt my feelings. I like to hear it. So feel free to be completely honest.